How's everybody doing today? I love these after lunch presentations. The metric, the KPI for a good presentation is that everybody stays awake, and that's it. Ralph, I'm glad you started with the definition of a digital twin, because right now, the way I see it, the sure way to start a fight is to walk into a room and say, you're working on a digital twin. And then you start a real conversation, right? So it is all over the map. Everybody has a different definition. And so much so that for the work that I do, I almost never use that term digital twin. So we'll tell you a little bit about what we are doing, and then you can call it whatever you like to call it. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have a background in project management, portfolio management, organization leadership, mostly in the deep water oil and gas business. We do business, large capital projects, in the Gulf of Mexico, but all over the world, anywhere in deep water. And the real reason why we actually embarked on this was there was a lot of conversation about digital twins in the operate phase. And there was nobody talking about how would you deliver in a digital way the project that we are going to deliver. And these are large capital projects. So there's very little conversation about that. And as a project manager, I found that was a big gap because that's the work that I do. And at the end of it, I hopefully produce something that could be used on the operate phase to provide value to them. But there was nobody talking about that journey that a project goes through from conception all the way to handover. And it was a major gap. And that's really why we got into it. The parallels that I draw are really around the automobile industry, where the assembly line changed the way they work. And really that was about how do you start something where there is complete transparency, how do you bring people together so that you can collaborate, and how do you get very quick feedback that allows you to avoid mistakes being propagated in the project phase. There was nothing that was out there that allowed me to do that while I was delivering a project. And that's really the start or the beginning of the journey that we were on. Let me tell you a little bit about the projects that we do. So on the left, you'll see at the top is a platform that we have called Perdido. It's in deepwater Gulf of Mexico. That's the part that you see, right? But if you go to the next slide, then you see the schematic of that full asset. And it's, most of it is below the water, right? So you don't really see it. It's about 800, about 1,000 feet tall. There's a tremendous amount of infrastructure on the subsea floor. And all of that actually forms the project that we deliver, the infrastructure project that we deliver. Our project timelines are anywhere from 5 to 10 years from the start, the conception of the project, all the way when it's handed over to operations so that we can actually get some product out of the ground. Project costs anywhere from 2 to 5 billion plus, depending on the scale of the project. Literally thousands of people are involved in these projects. And on an average project, you have more than 10 companies, but some of our largest projects have about 100 companies plus being involved in the delivery of the project. So it's immensely complex. It's very, very large. And so that poses a problem. And when we started to look at why would you even go into the digital space? I mean, things are good. Shell is very good at delivering projects. Why would you even step into the digital space? There were actually 4 important things and then a cultural aspect that came to mind. The first was around decision quality. And truly, decision quality being what we call data-based or based on an actual data is very difficult to do. And we all struggle with that. So I think that would resonate with everybody else. But there were other aspects to it that are not always very clear. We do very large integrated projects, and I think we are very good at it. Where we struggle is when things change. And that is the reality of the projects that we do. Our feedstock is not certain. And that is a very important aspect to understand in the way we deliver projects. So when something changes in our feedstock, that ripple effect has to propagate through the entire project, through a very complex system. And that's where we struggle. How do you actually make sure that everybody understands the implications of that change is absorbed in a manner which is timely and doesn't take us a couple of years to figure out what the impact was. Those are the kinds of things that we were struggling with. The third aspect is that, again, I talked about many, many people coming together to deliver these projects. Our supply chain ecosystem is actually extremely complex and very difficult to manage. And so keeping everybody on the same page, everybody having the same kind of information becomes a very, very big challenge. And then the third aspect was around productivity improvement. I don't know how, companies that you guys work for, but in general, productivity improvement is like an event. What happens is you get a team together, they collect a lot of information. Based on that information, they make some suggestions around productivity, and then you implement them, and then everybody goes away. And the next time you want to improve, you again have to collect a team together that collects all the information. So it's like event-based productivity, right? Rather than a continuous improvement where people have access, and the right people who feel the pain have access and are able to do something and give you ideas on how you should improve, right? It's a very different way of working, but it's enabled by having access to data and access to something what you're going to talk about in the digital space. And finally, you have a culture aspect of it, where there is, especially in large companies, there is a certain level of that I'm not going to mess with the process, even though I know that the process is not efficient, just because it takes so much effort, time and effort to actually change the process, that most people say, I'm not going to touch the process. Let the process be, I'm just going to follow it, right? And that's a very different way of looking at it than an engaged workforce that is able to challenge and change the process in a meaningful way, right? And that is something that actually, if digital is done right, can actually be enabled. And that we thought was worth pursuing. So based on these main pain points, we came up with an idea of what that vision would be. How would we start with a project very early on, when it's basically on paper, or even before that, when ideas are being thrown around? There are multiple ideas. Sometimes you have 10 plus concepts that are being looked at an early stage. Those are matured to a few concepts, right? And then you do more detailed studies, feed studies, or you engage other contractors, get their views. Based on that, one concept is selected. That concept is then taken on into detail phase, construction, installation, commissioning, handover, right? That's the whole process of how we go through a project. And being able to do that in a way where you have a kind of an integrating platform that brings all of these together with key challenges. So a lot of people talk about tags and how you can associate data with tags. There are no tags when you start a project, right? How do you move from a pre-tag world where you're still associating information into a tagged world without a handover? These are simple questions that are not always easy to answer, right? So you have to figure some of these things out. And it's very different from working in an operate phase, because an operate phase is kind of a static phase. It's the same phase carrying over for multiple decades while the asset operates. When you're in a project phase, you go through 3 or 4 different phases, each with different kinds of people, different kinds of engineers, different maturity of data, different contractors, different vendors, and you have to be able to move through all of those phases in a seamless way. Because if there are handovers that happen there, then you've basically replicated the problems that we suffer with in the physical world into the digital space. It'll be the same kind of problems that will happen as soon as you introduce transitions in that flow. So how do you move to the digital space that process is seamless? And that is the kind of problem that we are trying to tackle. So when we started looking at what this digital platform would look like, it came down to essentially 3 main aspects that form the backbone of this platform. The first is an integrated visual environment that allows for people to work in this space, to collaborate, to move that physical. And this is very similar again to the assembly line, which it provides the transparency and the nature of collaboration that is very much needed in the early phases, and that can propagate forward as the project moves forward. The second is kind of the backbone of all of this, is how do you build a data pipeline that works with the kind of data that you need at each phase. And I'll talk a little bit more about each one of them, because I think this is very key to understanding what we're trying to do. And the third aspect is what I call workflow orchestration. And this is, the complexity of the projects is large, and also they're quite diverse. But at a fundamental level, you go through very much the same processes, right? The steps are essentially the same. If you can templatize those workflows and then replicate them, it allows for a lot of simplicity and standardization, right? So if you can have a workflow engine that takes you through the process at a high level, and you're able to put that in the digital domain. We all actually do that in the physical domain, but if you're able to put that in a digital domain, it then provides tremendous benefits, and we can talk a little bit about what those are, right? So those are the three basic elements of the platform that we are starting to build in the project space. So I'll talk a little bit about each one of them. The first is a connected system. Now, each of our organizations have multiple digital tools that we use. They're all fantastic, but they're point tools. And the problem with that is that most of our engineers are spending a tremendous amount of time collecting information, putting it in a tool, then taking the output from that tool, and then massaging it so that it can go to the next tool that comes downstream of it. In fact, when we initially started working on it, we found out that on average, an engineer spends about 30% of their time actually doing useful work. 70% of the time is spent collecting information and then socializing it with various different stakeholders, making presentations, all of those things which I call are not value added to the core project. If we could just flip that around and have them spend 70% of their time doing value-added work, that means having all the data in front of them and then being able to make decisions that impact the project, then that's a game changer right there. And for us to be able to get to that space, you have to bring all the data that is buried in each one of these tools to one common integrating platform, so that people are not running around trying to get these pieces of information, but all of that is in one place where everybody has access and visibility to this integrated set of data, right? And therefore, you can move from there. You're not spending time trying to get this from various different people. So second aspect is around data. And this actually is easy to say, but actually very difficult to do. Because what happens is that there are many kinds of data, and the kind of data that you need at a certain stage of a project is actually different as the project matures. With all kinds of data, not all pieces of data are equally important. So I'll give you an example of, the reservoir pressure for the kind of work we do is an extremely important parameter, because as soon as your pressure changes for the reservoir, it has a cascading impact on essentially everything that you have done for the project, right? All equipment, all designs, everything is impacted. Now, managing that piece of information is different from managing, say, an output of an analysis. Okay. So there are various levels of robustness that is needed by understanding what data is absolutely critical, which we call key parameters, and they have to be managed at a data level. So that means there is an owner of that particular piece of data. It's audited, there is change control. All of those are managed not at a document level, but at a data level. But that kind of robustness is not needed for all the data that is produced in a project. So understanding which piece of data at what stage of a project needs to be managed at what level of robustness is actually quite key, right? Because otherwise you'll overwhelm your system and it'll have so much information that people will get lost in just the data that they have, right? So being able to build a system that is actually valuable requires us to understand how data needs to flow and how it needs to be managed through the various phases of the project. And then the data comes from various different sources. It comes from owner-generated, it comes from vendors, it comes from various different contractors that we have. They're also stored in various different places. So how all of that is orchestrated and how it all comes together is also a very important aspect of building that data pipeline. So we spent a lot of time trying to understand all of that. Not that we have got it all figured out, but at least we have an understanding now of where we stand. And then the third aspect, like I mentioned, was around workflow orchestration. So if you have, when we go through a project, we go through various different decision gates, right? So you progress a project, you come to a decision gate. At that time, a group of leaders takes a look at the project and says, well, okay, it looks like a good investment, let's carry forward. Right? So that's how we make sure that the project is assured and you're not doing something that will actually not provide value to the company at the end. So in this process, in the way we work, we actually basically do two things between decision gates. You actually, put out some core documents, right? Or you make some in-between decisions that allow for people to get a comprehensive picture of where you are in the project, right? These are very standard for every project. There's a template for it, right? And we follow that. If that template can be put in the digital space, where we understand exactly what work is going on, you're able to follow where we are on a project in kind of a dashboard format, then it provides tremendous amount of clarity to not just the project manager, but the entire team. It allows you to understand where the bottlenecks are, or why you haven't started a particular piece of work because, well, you've been waiting for 2 weeks for somebody to send you a file. Those are the kinds of inefficiencies that are built in a complex project. And there is no way right now where we have visibility on how we are spending time. We have very good visibility on how where we spend our money on the cost side, but on the schedule side, very, very vague. We don't understand how we spend our time, right? And so what this allows us to do is to go and understand where you spend your time. And that then allows you to tackle one of the biggest metrics and levers that you have is shortening the cycle time of a project. That provides tremendous value to an owner-operator, right? But the only way to do that is to understand where you spend your time, where is the inefficiency, and right now our systems don't give us that kind of understanding. So I'll give you a quick overview of how we are kind of using this in some of our project constructs. So very early on, when we have a project like I mentioned, there are many, many concepts that are looked at. At that time, you want tools that are extremely flexible, that allow you to move things and change things very, very quickly. There is no point putting a very rigid, robust system in place at that time, because that is not the need of the hour, right? So at that time, you want people to collaborate. So a visual system that allows people to move things around, understand the implications of the changes, but everybody kind of works in a portal that is visual, right? That is the tool you need. So that's the kind of setup that we have right now. Provides a lot of flexibility, but it's not very robust in terms of data and how it is captured, because that is not what is needed at that time. As we move forward, then you have a need for all of these things to be aggregated, because you've gone from very high-level thinking around concepts to a little more maturity in the thinking. You have maybe 4 or 5 different concepts you're looking at. You want them to be aggregated. You want a quick understanding of how much each will cost. What kind of problems there might be, where are subsea problems, access to land, those kinds of things. And for that, you have a system that aggregates a lot of information in a visual way so that people can understand and make some decisions. There is a little more robustness to this in terms of engagement with contractors. You're trying to get feedback from them. So data is a little more aggregated, but still not robust. So you're not really using an engineering data warehouse for people who are familiar with that term, right? That's a very robust way of managing data. And then you get to a stage where you have basically chosen a concept, right? So you've decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. That's the time when we introduce a lot of robustness in the way we capture data and how it's stored, MOCs, how change is managed, and things like that, right? Because in the early phase, you are creating value, so you need a wide spectrum of ideas. And after the concept is chosen, you're essentially preserving value. That means you want to make sure that you're on schedule, on cost. You've done the wide thinking part of it. Now you're trying to deliver on time, right? And that's the space when you want to introduce a lot of robustness in the way you work, even in the digital space, because you're not constraining ideas. Now you're making sure that the idea that you're going forward with is actually delivered per plan. So what we started doing is putting things together. I won't go into a lot of details here, but really the idea is the tools that you use have to match the work that is being done at a certain stage of a project. Don't try to use tools that are meant to be used at a much later stage of a project, in an early part of a project, because you'll actually not get any benefit. In fact, you'll constrain the thinking that is required early on. That's all I had. I do want to leave you maybe with three things that from this work, just understandings, and shouldn't be anything new for you. The first thing is this is not a technical challenge. It's much more of a people challenge. And what I mean by that is, of course, you're working with project engineers. Project engineers really like to touch and feel things. And what you're trying to do is to paint a vision for them that, hey, believe me, this is how it's going to be when it's all done. And that is very difficult for them. That's not how they work, right? So you're working through, just by nature, the people who are very good at delivering projects are not built to be able to work in this way. And that's going to be one of your biggest challenges. The second is an agile way of working, right? So a lot of projects like what we call waterfall plots, right? They build a plan and they execute a plan, right? And they don't like a lot of changes to that plan, right? So this is very much an agile way of working, where things are changing, you're learning, the feedback loop is very, very fast, and that is a culture change. That is a change that the organization has to absorb. The third aspect of that is failure. In general, the kind of industry that at least I am in, failure is a bad word. And in digital, you have to learn how to fail fast and quickly, because that's how you learn. You have to be able to marry the two, so that you're not making stupid mistakes that impact the business, but you also allow people to learn, because none of us actually know how this will work, right? We are all trying to learn, and for that you have to start experimenting. So it's a people problem. 90% of my time actually goes in the people side of things. The technical part I know will be done, but actually where we'll fail, if we fail, is on the people side. The second aspect that I want to maybe leave you with is that it would be great if you can somehow get the business to own this building of this, the thinking around this. What we have for the project that we have is that we have actually almost nobody full-time working on this. Everybody has a day job working a project. And what I've tried to do is to build enough energy and vision so that they are excited about what we are doing. And they are they are the people who are building this with our vendor, right? So they are the people who give us the use cases. They tell us what's working, that's not. They are at the coal face. They feel the pain on a daily basis. It's a very difficult challenge to balance, because, of course, if something comes up in their day job, then this is the thing that gets dropped. But what I'm sure about is that we are working on problems that impact them on a daily basis, right? And that's sometimes the disconnect that we have, is that the people who build some of these platforms in many cases are not the people who feel the pain on a daily basis. And that's where the communication gets lost, right? So we've tried to change that by just doing it a completely different way. So this is not IT run. This is actually run by the projects group. We have, of course, IT and IM people, of course, part of the team, but they are not actually running, building this platform. So that's the third part. And then the final part is just collaboration and working with other folks within the company who are also trying to do the same thing. What I see many times that within especially a large company like Shell, it becomes one product versus the other, right? So it's a you win, I lose kind of mentality, and that doesn't do anybody any good. So the best way to do this is to collaborate, be open about the work that you're doing, the failures that you're having, trouble that you're having, openly sharing that, learning from other groups, and hopefully building a system that actually allows you to understand the way you need to work in the digital space, and the tools will come after that, right? Right now, what the biggest problem I see is that we cannot even articulate what we want, at least from an owner's perspective. We just look at shiny things and everybody gets very excited about it. But actually, how do we want to work in the digital realm is not very clear. And I think our biggest gain from what we are doing would be to understand how we want to work in a digital way, using a digital platform. And whatever tool comes, is used is actually a secondary conversation. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.